When we speak of slavery, the transatlantic trade dominates our collective memory, a wound rightly remembered. But there is another history, vast and largely unspoken, stretching across the Asian continent for thousands of years. From the river valleys of ancient Mesopotamia to the spice ports of the East Indies, millions of men, women, and children were bought, sold, and forced into bondage. Their stories were rarely recorded, their suffering rarely taught. This is not a history confined to one race or one empire. It is a human story of power, exploitation, and resilience. To forget it is to leave the historical record incomplete. To remember it is to honor those who endured. This is the history of Asian slavery, the chapter that time forgot.
Long before European empires cast their shadows, slavery was woven into the fabric of Asia's earliest civilizations. In ancient China, slaves known as nu served nobles and officials, captured in warfare or condemned through debt. Oracle bones from the Shang Dynasty, some of humanity's oldest written records, document slaves as property, sometimes sacrificed in royal burial rites. In India, the Arthashastra, written by the strategist Kautilya around 300 BCE, codified laws governing slavery in extraordinary detail, distinguishing between war captives, debt bondage, and those born into servitude. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia and the Persian Empire, vast slave workforces built the monuments and fed the armies of kings like Darius and Xerxes. Across these civilizations, bondage was not an aberration, it was an institution.
From the 7th century onward, Arab merchants transformed slavery into one of the medieval world's most extensive commercial networks. While the transatlantic trade is well documented, the Arab slave trade, spanning over 12 centuries, is far less discussed in Western classrooms. Asian peoples were among its many victims. Coastal raids along the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia, and East Africa supplied enslaved people to markets stretching from Basra to Baghdad. The Zanj Rebellion of 869 CE, one of the largest slave uprisings in history, was led in part by enslaved East Africans and Asians laboring in the salt marshes of Iraq. Concubinage, domestic service, and military slavery were all common fates. At its height, the trade moved hundreds of thousands of people across the Indian Ocean, leaving cultural and demographic imprints that still echo today.
When European powers arrived in Asia, they brought with them not only ships and cannons, but established systems of forced labor. The Portuguese, among the first to establish Asian trade routes in the 16th century, enslaved thousands from Goa to Macau, transporting Asian captives across the globe. The Dutch East India Company, the VOC, ran one of the largest slave operations in Asian history. From their base in Batavia, present-day Jakarta, Dutch colonial administrators enslaved peoples from Ceylon, Bengal, the Malay archipelago, and beyond. British colonial rule in India institutionalized various forms of forced and bonded labor, from plantation work to indentured servitude, a system that exported Indian laborers under conditions barely distinguishable from slavery to Fiji, Trinidad, and Mauritius. For millions of Asians, colonialism and slavery were inseparable experiences.
Behind the ledgers and edicts were human beings who refused to be reduced to property. Across Asia, enslaved people resisted through rebellion, flight, sabotage, and the quiet preservation of culture. The Zanj Rebellion raged for 14 years. In colonial Batavia, enslaved Balinese and Madurese organized uprisings against their Dutch captors. In India, bonded laborers fled into forests and formed fugitive communities. Some stories survived only in oral tradition, whispered across generations because the written record was controlled by those in power. The physical toll was immense. families torn apart, children born into bondage, languages and spiritual practices suppressed, and yet resistance persisted. Songs, coded languages, spiritual syncretism, these were acts of defiance. The human spirit proved again and again that no institution of power could fully extinguish the will to be free.
So why is this history so rarely taught? In part because colonial powers controlled the archives. In part because nation-states built their identities around selective memory. In part because the communities most affected lacked the platform to demand recognition. But the legacy of Asian slavery is not confined to the past. Today, forced labor persists across the region, in construction camps in the Gulf state where South Asian migrant workers toil under kafala contracts, in Southeast Asian fishing fleets where men are trafficked and held at sea, in supply chains that underpin global consumer goods. Reckoning with ancient and colonial-era slavery is not merely an academic exercise. It illuminates the structural conditions that enable exploitation today. History honestly told is not a burden. It is a map. And to find our way forward, we first must know where we have been.